And we are live, back with another Boxing Squared live stream, impromptu live stream. I was going to do a post-fight video on Daniel Dubois being jabbed into submission by Joe Joyce, but I thought, no, I'll jump on live here, have a quick chat with you all, and if you're listening on archive, thank you for listening back. Now, this was some kind of fight. I really enjoyed this one. It wasn't necessarily maybe the barn burner that some people thought it was going to be, but for me, this fight lived up to the expectations. We were expecting a lot, and I actually thought that it delivered. It was one of these tense affairs where there was a lot of seesaw action at different points, and I think a lot of people just assumed that at some point, Daniel Dubois was going to kick on, take advantage of some potential openings that were there, but it just never happened. Daniel Dubois jabbed into submission by Joe Joyce. Daniel Dubois was outboxed in this fight, and a lot of what I thought Joe Joyce had to do to win, he actually did do and implement in this fight. He's often been criticized for being, like his namesake really, the juggernaut, coming forward, sort of throwing a lot of volume and not really sort of caring about what was coming back. But different performance here tonight against Daniel Dubois. He actually was defensively responsible. He was boxing with Dubois and outboxing Dubois. The jab, the key weapon in his arsenal. And over the course of the fight, you could see that that left eye was starting to swell, even from the first round or two, and then it just got progressively worse. And the jab was the key to the victory. And often an underrated punch, but often we say that this is the punch, that is the money punch for most heavyweights. If you've got a good jab, then you're going to go far in the heavyweight division. And Joe Joyce, through the back of his jab, really sort of kept Daniel Dubois out of this fight and from doing some certain things that he would normally want to do. But the jab, the key weapon, minced up Daniel Dubois' eye, something chronic. And I guess we should probably, pretty early on here, talk about, well, what happened with that finish, because it was a jab in the 10th round. And to me, it looked like, because obviously Daniel Dubois took a few steps away, took a knee, and obviously was counted out. And he did what a lot of heavyweights do, and he tried to beat the count after the count had been administered. And often that does look a certain way, and people will say that he quit. But in the circumstances, it looked like he probably couldn't have continued for long, because that eye was at that point completely closed up, and he reacted the way he reacted, because that jab just closed it once and for all. But Joe Joyce, the winner here, I guess a lot of people will say it was too much too soon for Daniel Dubois. And maybe it was, but this was a different version of Joe Joyce. This wasn't sort of Joyce sort of plodding forward and just throwing volume with no regard to what was coming back. He boxed his way to victory here. In this version of Joe Joyce, if he continues to do that, remembering some of the keys to victory besides the jab, was also he was using movement, using the ring, but he was also using head movement, often maligned for not moving his head and just eating shots and eating them like Tic Tacs and being prepared to do so. But tonight it was different. He was using his head, he was throwing feints, he was using the ring. And these were some of the things that I said in my pre-fight video earlier this week, that if Joe Joyce was to win, I thought that he would have to use some of his natural advantages, use his height and his reach, which he did have over Daniel Dubois, but also use the ring. And we did see that for quite long stretches of the fight, that as Dubois was trying to stalk forward at points, he was just trying to stay out of the way, circling away from that power hand. And he often took that right hand away from Daniel Dubois through this fight. And I guess it has to be said of Daniel Dubois. He didn't really do some of the things I think many of us were expecting, but you have to give credit to Joe Joyce for that. But I did think Dubois in this fight, he was a little guilty of going headhunting. I don't think that there was enough body work. And I guess one thing that will be discussed quite widely now is his stamina. Because there were certainly stretches in the fight where he was being outworked by Joe Joyce and allowing Joyce to outwork him, and Joyce was picking up rounds. And don't get me wrong, Dubois had some strong rounds in there, and I think we can probably remember, I think it was the third round where he obviously came out very strong, but there were different rounds where he would fight in spurts, try to get Joyce out of there, and when it didn't work, he sort of resulted back to sort of energy-saving mode for the rest of the fight. And there were one or two rounds there where Joyce was able to come back quite strong with the jab in particular, the 1-2 and, a few other shots to either win that round or make it at least very close. And make no mistake about it, there were some very close rounds in this fight. 1 or 2 where I was struggling to sort of score it either way. After 8 rounds, I had it level. I know some people might have had it 5-3 to Joyce. I have seen a bit of that online as well. But this was a very tense and competitive fight. It was exactly the sort of fight that I was hoping for. And I guess it sort of pours a lot of cold water on the people that thought that this was not going to be a competitive fight, that this was only Daniel Dubois' fight to win, that he was going to be the only potential winner in this. And this is why I was saying this is a really hard fight to call. It's a 50-50, and I didn't know which way to lean because of different factors. But it also depended on the known unknowns, as I sort of said in my preview video. We knew what Daniel Dubois would be looking to do, but what was Joe Joyce going to do? And he was the one that showed he could adapt. He could actually box with Dubois and outbox him, which I don't think many people were expecting. Daniel Dubois actually has had a very good jab in recent years developing, and we saw that in full flight against Nathan Gorman. In this fight, he was out-jabbed, he was outworked on the jab, and Joe Joyce won the battle of the jabs. And ultimately, that was the key, I think, to winning this fight for Joe Joyce. He was really mincing up that left eye, and that became an issue after, the first 3 or 4 rounds. You could really see it was a problem. And by the time that that jab popped into his eye in round 10, it was basically all she wrote, because Daniel Dubois at that point, it had either closed up or to the point where he just couldn't see out of it effectively, had to take a knee, and he was counted out. So I will get to some comments in the chat here, but I was very impressed with what I saw from Joe Joyce. And I think this is going to turn a lot of the naysayers for Joyce to his side, because he's shown some adaptability, some versatility, and it was a very accomplished performance. I know some people will say, well, it was too soon for Daniel Dubois, maybe he was undercooked, maybe this fight should have been a year away, and what we saw in the fight maybe reflected that. Well, the fight was made, and I think it is what it is now. If he had have won and won in dominant fashion, people would have said, well, he's ready to be in a world championship fight. But the reality is, Joe Joyce outthought him, outworked him, outjabbed him, and he got the win here. And some people will say that Dubois quit. Obviously, that eye didn't look very good. He probably couldn't really continue in the state that he was in. But that is a full, credit to Joe Joyce for his effort in this fight. And for Dubois, because he did battle back through periods of adversity when Joe Joyce was on top. He did respond at times to his corner instruction to do certain things to get back in the fight. But I think one of the things that was lacking for him, and I've been saying for a little while now, is he a bit too muscle-bound, because he could only fight in those spurts, and when he couldn't get rid of Joyce in those spurts where he was really working, it became very hard for him to actually stay in the round, because he'd have 20 or 30 seconds of action, and then all of a sudden he had to go back into a shell because he was gassed out a bit. And I think after about 6 or 7 rounds, you could see the pace of the fight was taking a toll on Dubois, even though it wasn't necessarily a frenetic fight. But on the line for this fight was the EBU title, so Joe Joyce, the new European champion, also the British title and the Commonwealth title. So Joe Joyce picks up a bag full of trinkets here. And also, you may have seen during the week, there was the WBO, which was very perturbed and upset and saying things. This is its president publicly, that the British Boxing Board of Control needed to make sure that its title was on the line for this fight. But because it was a British title fight with the others on as well, no sanctioning body belts would be on the line. So it'll be interesting to see now what happens with the rankings in the WBO, because Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois, and Dubois in particular, he was ranked highly. He was number 2. So this could potentially see Joe Joyce leapfrog all the way to number 2, but the belt wasn't on the line for this in terms of it wasn't here. So does that play a part? Because there was the veiled threat by Paco Varcasel, the president of the WBO, that maybe something would happen if the belt wouldn't be on the line. But he didn't really sort of go into any detail, but it was a veiled threat. But you could also make the case that Joseph Parker, who's been at number 3, maybe he will rise to number 2. And there has been some talk now that, potentially, if Anthony Joshua is forced to drop a belt and it ends up being the WBO, that Alexander Usyk may face the next available contender, which had been at this point Daniel Dubois. But getting back to the keys to the victory here. Joe Joyce, the jab. He really out-jabbed Daniel Dubois. Helped take away that right hand, and that was a big key for him. And I guess we have to credit as well Joyce's chin, because he did take some big punches. Maybe not as many shots, and maybe not as clean as we would have thought. But Daniel Dubois, after a number of rounds, maybe, the parallel to the Kevin Johnson fight back in 2018 is maybe not quite like for like, but it did sort of seem that he was running out of ideas about how to break Joe Joyce down. And I think Dubois became a little guilty of headhunting. He is a good body puncher, but I don't think we really saw enough of that. And I think we have to say, as Stoned Alligator just says in the chat here, Joyce's chin seems legit. And a good chin, that will take you some way in the heavyweight division. But if you don't have the skills to go with it, and in particular a good jab, you're not going to get to the top. And I think we've seen, on the strength of that performance, bearing in mind this is a different style of performance Joyce has thrown up in recent fights, Joyce, I think, could mix it at a higher level with some guys in the top 10. I think he can be in some very good fights if he can utilize head movement and movement in general, as he did in this fight, throwing feints, making it difficult for his opponent, which is some of the knocks, the criticisms that have been on him. I think he can be successful fights. I guess, what next for Joyce? It's unclear, because will he raise to number 2 in the WBO by beating Daniel Dubois? Elsewhere, what will this mean for his ranking? What fights will this set up? It's a little unclear at this point. Bearing in mind that Frank Warren doesn't have a lot of heavyweights in his stable, will he be able to maybe match Joyce with some of the top-ranked heavyweights? Him and Bob Arum do have a relationship. Maybe they will be able to get some fights made. And possibly that could be a good option for Daniel Dubois too, because he will need to be in some rebuild fights of a certain level. What next for Daniel Dubois? That's a big question. There will be some people that after that will say, actually, he's not ready. Maybe he won't be ready. Has he been overrated? I think his skill set is legit. So I can hear someone yell outside. There's a bus stop near my house, so apologies for that. But in terms of Daniel Dubois, there'll be fights out there for him. Maybe some people, after seeing that performance against Joyce, perhaps promoters will be more willing to toss in some of their people against Daniel Dubois. We will have to see. But I'll get to the chat here. So we've got more than 1,000 in the building at this point. So thank you one and all for joining the Boxing Squared live stream. Smash that like button on the way in or the way out. That would be much appreciated. So I haven't sized. Jim Blomqvist says Warren seemed pissed off after the fight. As well he might, remembering Daniel Dubois recently just signed a new 5-year contract with Frank Warren. He was the new era, the new wave. I think what Frank Warren was pinning his hopes on for the next couple of years, to really make some money, become a heavyweight champion. He was seen by many as the heir apparent to the heavyweight title. A heavyweight in waiting that just had to do his time, and eventually he would be successful at the top level. And he still could be. I don't think we can write Daniel Dubois off after this performance. There was a lot of good in there tonight, but I think he is, 23 years old, and perhaps, the lack of experience did show in there at times. Remembering Joe Joyce with an amateur, he has been, in the ring for over a decade now, or about a decade or so now. So he's racked up a lot of experience in the amateurs, and I think we saw him going back to some of his amateur style to some extent. He utilized his height and his reach, and he used the ring. And I'm not necessarily sure that Daniel Dubois was that prepared for it. Perhaps he thought that Joe Joyce would come plodding forward, that Joyce would just be there for the taking. And I know a lot of people ahead of this fight had said that this wasn't going to be a competitive fight, that Daniel Dubois was just going to take this with ease. Clearly not. Clearly Joe Joyce prepared for this fight accordingly. He knew what he had to do to win, and they came up with a game plan, and ultimately it's been successful. And the jab in particular was the key weapon. And I don't think a lot of people thought coming into this fight that he would be the one out-jabbing Daniel Dubois and winning the battle of the jabs. He made mincemeat out of that left eye of Daniel Dubois, and ultimately Dubois' eye closed basically up, and he couldn't continue. And he did sort of, do, as I mentioned earlier, that sort of thing that heavyweights do, that they've missed the count, but then they pretend to try to beat the count and feign, oh, I thought I made the count. But it is what it is. Some people will say that Dubois quit, and I guess, On balance of what we saw, you could make a case that he did, but with the eye in the condition that it was, understandable too. But some people may say on the back of that, does Daniel Dubois lack heart? I mean, there were some interesting moments in the corner between rounds. He, especially early on, with Joyce having success in the first couple of rounds, maybe more success than Daniel Dubois was expecting. Dubois is a guy that's used to dictating the pace, the tempo, but Joyce was throwing him out of his rhythm, and you could see him between rounds at points shaking, and his corner was really having to, use some colourful language to try to get through to him and bring him back on track. And he did respond, especially in that third round. He came out very strong. In the second round too, he didn't show nearly as much as respect for Joyce. That first round was a really feeling out round. Maybe he gave Joyce a bit too much respect, but ultimately that allowed Joyce to start to get into his flow, his rhythm. And it became a back-and-forth seesaw fight, often because Daniel Dubois would fight in spurts, and after he was finished, Joe Joyce would pick up the slack and keep working. And that was, a very good attribute of his. His engine was on display tonight again. He was able to just keep going and make Daniel Dubois work more than he wanted to. Does this mean that Daniel Dubois, who was at 245 pounds and has been getting more sort of bulky and a bit muscle-bound in recent years, does this just fine down a bit? Maybe lose 5 or 10 pounds of that muscle to try actually have a bit more stamina in the tank? Because that was one of the issues, I think. As for Frank Warren, yeah, I'm sure he will be crying into a cereal right now. Maybe it's something a bit harder than cereal at this point, maybe a couple of stiff drinks. But obviously Daniel Dubois is going to have to rebuild here. And perhaps Joe Joyce and Sam Jones's manager, that said Daniel Dubois had not had a middle fight, that he had had fights at a certain level, and this was going to be a jump up. And it always appeared that it was going to be. And was the preparation in the past year or so since the Gorman fight, which was at a certain level, lower than this Joyce fight, but he'd been thrown up a bunch of stiffs, Kyotaru Fujimoto. You also had Ebenezer Tete, Ricardo Schneiders, guys to get Daniel Dubois some of the rounds and the experience that perhaps he did need ahead of this fight. I don't necessarily think this fight in the context of how many fights Daniel Dubois had was too soon, but some of the fights before this one perhaps weren't as tough and provided a stiff enough test to prepare him accordingly. People will go back and forth about this, but on the night, I think Daniel Dubois, he was up for it. He was just outboxed, outthought, outworked. Joe Joyce came in here and did a number on him on the back of the jab. And Joe Joyce, this version of Joe Joyce, can be successful in the heavyweight division. The other version of Joe Joyce that people have been highly critical of, the guy who just plods forward and sort of throws punches, a la from The Simpsons, Lisa Simpson, that sort of windmilling, just punching style. That version of Joe Joyce is going to come unstuck. But this version is going to have a lot more success. He was defensively responsible for large stretches of this fight. And that showed. I mean, obviously Daniel Dubois, he is still a work in progress. 23 is not the finished product. He can certainly come again, and maybe this will be, for him, the making of his career. That they can actually be honest with some of his development, where he is, what he needs to do, and things that he needs to change. It's all well and good fighting some of the lower level fodder that had been fed and saying you're going to be the next heavyweight champion. But now proving it is another matter. And the fact he came unstuck at this level, which people will say is not at world level, although perhaps it's debatable. Joe Joyce, I think, is ready for a world level fight. I'm not saying that he will win a world level fight. I'm not saying that he'll become a heavyweight champion. But Joe Joyce has proved that he is ready for that next test, that next step, whereas Daniel Dubois has to go back to the drawing board. And how long that rebuild will be for Dubois, anyone's guess. Frank Warren may actually provide him a few more of these lower level opponents that he's had more recently, just as some confidence builders. But he's going to need to change some things up. Does he need to look at his training setup? The way that he's been bulking up in recent years. Well, I guess there'll be a heavy dissection of that. And some people will question: does he have the heart? Does he have the stones to be in some of these tough, these hard fights? Can he sort of pull through? Does he have that wherewithal? It's a question. This will be a good experience for him, even though it's a painful experience for him. And for Joe Joyce, it had surprised me that some people had written him off so badly. Ahead of this fight, I said it was a very tough fight to call. It could go either way. This was a fight that a lot of people, including myself, saw as a genuine 50-50. A rare fight where heading into it, there were so many outcomes that could possibly, transpire. And I think Joyce by stoppage in the 10th round was maybe one of those ones that, 10 or 20% of people were going for, but not necessarily the norm. And I had seen a groundswell, at least on my channel in recent weeks, a lot of people warming up to the idea of Joe Joyce actually not just being in this fight, but winning this fight. So, kudos and credit to those who did pick Joe Joyce, because obviously there were a lot of people picking against him. The bookies had him, I think it was a 3-1 underdog to win this fight. But a lot of people may say that Daniel Dubois, maybe he was overhyped for what he'd done. And maybe there is something in that. But clearly he is a talent. He is still one of the best heavyweight prospects in the world. But there's also a reason that I've had Joe Joyce among my top 6 prospects for the past couple of years as well, because I've seen this guy with the way that he can sort of just keep going with his engine, the volume of punches that he throws, and the chin that he's got. That's always going to take you quite a long way. And he's always been a bit of a polarizing figure, Joe Joyce has been, but I think, he's incredibly effective. And at the end of the day, he may not win some style points, but he's certainly effective. Get to the chat here. So Sam says Frank Warren crying into a cereal. He just might be. Cam Mal says the guy couldn't see a man, can't see he can't fight. Okay, maybe a bit of punctuation would have helped with that one. Stoned Alligator says Hrgovic next for Joyce Dubois versus eBay. Well, Kingsley eBay has been an improving fighter. It's probably more likely eBay faces someone in the top rank bubble, possibly a Jared Anderson. So Mr. Wawa says 3-1 underdog. So I'm sure there'll be some people out there looking very happy with themselves on those bets that they put on Joe Joyce. Damien says Joe looked terrible. He's faxes his punches. Not sure what that means, but I don't think he looked terrible in there. I think Joe Joyce used his height, he used his reach. Sure, he can look a little bit ungainly in there, but we've just seen what he's just done to the, consensus #1 heavyweight prospect in the world. He's incredibly effective. He used the ring, he used his height, he used his reach. He outboxed Daniel Dubois, a guy that, the bookies had 3-1 to beat him. I think you're downplaying actually how good Joe Joyce actually is in the performance that he's put in here. So Kevin says, Joe, easy, my man, too intelligent for Dubois. Well, he outthought him, and he was the one that was adapting in this fight rather than Dubois. And I guess that's one thing for the future. Does Daniel Dubois, does he have an issue with adapting in fight? Because sure, you can prepare for something, but does he have that ring IQ, that ability to adapt mid-fight? Because when he was told to sort of be a bit more active and put it on Joyce, he was able to do that, but it was mainly more of the same, just more volume. L-Dog says, I think Joe Joyce looked good. I think he did look good too, and I think this version of Joe Joyce, who actually uses a bit of head movement, some feints, uses the ring, he can be a hard out for anyone in the heavyweight division. He can have some good fights. Simon says Daniel Dubois versus Alan Babbage. No, I think that's a mismatch. Babbage gets knocked out. Espanjo Shadow, apologies if I got that wrong. I did expect Joyce to win, but what shocked me is how he won, when he just got out jabbed Daniel easily and jabbed KO to win. Yeah, I mean, Daniel Dubois is generally regarded as a guy who's got a very good jab, but he was out jabbed, and that was the key to the course of the fight, with the accuracy of his jab and his punches, made mincemeat of that left eye. It really was something to behold. He was able to close that up over several rounds, and it was the key to victory, that jab. So, credit to him and the game plan that they've come up with. I mean, it was interesting, though, because when you look at this fight, I was like, where's Ismail Salas, his head trainer? Because he had been in the UK and it was someone else in the corner. So I'm not sure what happened there. But I had seen that Salas was back in the USA. So I have no idea really what's sort of going on with that situation. Bang for Buck Gamer PC says, Boxing Square, do you remember when I said to you if it goes past 8 rounds, advantage the Juggernaut? Well, there it is. Well, I don't remember you specifically saying it, but a number of people have been backing Joyce, so good call on that one. So, Magmatic Limited says Dubois has never been in a real fight. I think he has been in a real fight before, but obviously not to this level. I mean, styles make fights, and Joyce was the one that was able to do something different here. They came up with a game plan that obviously Daniel Dubois was not prepared for. This, I thought it was after having seen some of the earlier fights from Joe Joyce under Ismael Salas when they worked together earlier in his career. The likes of the Donny Palmer one, and there was one or two others, where he was using the ring. He wasn't just plodding forward, he was actually using the ring, popping that jab out. And in this case, that movement of the ring was, so beneficial in this fight too, because he was riding some of the shots that Daniel Dubois was, catching up with him. He was able to just ride those shots and not take the full. A few shots that Joyce took clean, big shots, but ultimately he was able to wear that. And you got to say, the guy's got a chin and a half. Maybe Daniel Dubois didn't catch up with him with everything he would have wanted to, but ultimately that's credit to Joyce and what he was doing in the ring. Okay, so Unger says Ismael Salas was sent back to the USA with COVID, so that's a shame for Joyce, but they still got the job done, so thanks for that one. L-Dog says, I hope Salas is okay. Someone his age needs to take some sort of thing very seriously. He's a great trainer. And actually, I mean, Salas, I just saw a photo just on Instagram just this morning, sort of popping up in front of a hotel in Las Vegas. So Natalie says, Boxing Squared. Yes, that's my name. Nathan says, looks like it was just too early for Dubois in a fight of this magnitude. And I guess that will be part of the sort of post-mortem of this fight. Was it too soon? I mean, I think if the Joe Joyce that has turned up recently in other fights, that could have actually, just plodded forward and was just throwing shots with no regard to safety, then that version of Joe Joyce would have got beaten. I think Daniel Dubois would have pummeled him. But clearly Daniel Dubois and his team, Joyce and his team knew that, they couldn't do that. I mean, everyone's been saying he needed to be more defensively responsible. And he was tonight. And, clearly they outthought them with the game plan, but also Joe Joyce was able to execute that game plan and Daniel Dubois wasn't able to respond. So Natalie says, do you think it was extremely rude of Frank to say what he said after the fight? Well, I haven't actually, so I've got my broadcast of the post-fight paused because I've come live, so I haven't actually seen that. So if someone can actually, if you can drop that down in the chat, I'll go back and watch it later anyway. I imagine over the next couple of days there's going to be a few different videos and bits and pieces where people will be dissecting, what's gone on here and what's been said. So I haven't caught up with that. Harry says, maybe Dubois should give Fujimoto another go. No, thank you. So I'll just pop down to the bottom of the chat here. Cobra says, in Triple D's interview after the fight, he seemed in shock or that he had concussion. He said he went down, it's just happened. Think he couldn't just take the beating and wasn't ready for it. Well, clearly he wasn't ready for what? I mean, Joe Joyce said what he was basically going to do, that he would keep coming, and that someone like Dubois wasn't ready, hadn't faced anyone like him, and it was a mistake, and so it proved. L-Dog says, I think the way that he beat Joyce is to go to his body. Hrgovic had success in the WBS against Joyce, and when he whipped that left hook into the ribs. Well, that was one of the things I was mentioning at the start of the stream. I thought Daniel Dubois got a little bit head-hunting happy, and he neglected the body. One of the things that I think many of us had seen ahead of this fight, Joyce's body could be hurt. We'd seen in the Bryant Jennings fight, a well-placed body shot to the liver had Joyce in all sorts of trouble. Daniel Dubois, I can only really remember 4 or 5 occasions across the fight where he threw that left hook to the body in. And often it wasn't with full power, it might have been at the end of a combination. So I do think that there was an opportunity where he could have been working Joyce to the body, chop the tree down and the head will follow. But obviously, coulda, shoulda, woulda at this point. He's reacting to why Joyce was fighting. Clearly he was not able to fight in the way that he otherwise would have wanted to. Dennis says Daniel Dubois got schooled, inexperience caught up with him. This fight was too early, needs more experience in defense. Joyce did what he had to do, did it. And I think one of the things that surprised me to some extent was that Daniel Dubois was so hittable in this fight. The lack of head movement became apparent, and obviously I think that's one of the things they're going to have to work on. His trainer was saying, you need to move your head, you need to dip down, get out of the way, bend at the waist. You're taking too many shots. And he just couldn't seem to get out of there, out of the way of the jab. Joyce was just peppering him with it throughout the fight, and he became more hittable after his spurts. Joyce would just keep racking up rounds off the back of activity, outwork him, and the jab was the key to that. So Jim says, I don't think it's a question of old and new Joyce. I think he adjusts to his opponents. And that could be it. I mean, I've spoken about in some of the fights that he's had, say, against Berman Stavern, where he was heavily criticized after that fight. I thought that it was a case he just didn't respect Stavern. He didn't care what was coming back at him. But he's proven to be a very polarizing figure in the heavyweight division with fans. A lot of people don't know how to sort of rate Joe Joyce. They haven't known how to rate Joe Joyce. How does this help rate Joe Joyce for some fans? I mean, I think on the back of that performance, you have to say Joe Joyce is definitely inside the top 20, maybe inside the top 15. Daniel Dubois, to some extent, was an unproven commodity, but we had seen what he'd done, and at an impressive level against a guy like a Nathan Gorman. I mean, I had Dubois in resume. I couldn't sort of put him too much higher than that. And Joyce was also there or thereabouts in my top 20, but I think off the back of that, he raises a little higher, perhaps inside the top 15 for me. How about you? So I'll just get down to the start of the chat here. So apologies if you're leaving a question or comment for me. The chat is moving extremely fast. We've got nearly 1,000 in the building here. So I thank you one and all for joining another Boxing Squared live stream. Please smash that like button on the way in or the way up. That would be much appreciated. So I guess to recap, because often what happens with the live streams, there's a turnover of audience and all that sort of stuff. I was very impressed with the performance by Joyce. This was for me at least, a very exciting fight. I know for some, maybe it wasn't the sort of action, sort of packed, sort of spectacular that some people may have thought that Daniel Dubois was just going to blitz him. But this was a very, big fight feel for me, gave me the nerves ahead of the fight. I was, on the edge of my seat the whole time watching this. Very tense, back and forth. It lived up to my expectations and then some. Very seesaw battle. And don't get me wrong, Daniel Dubois had his moments in this fight, just not enough of them, and he seemed to not be able to respond to what Joe Joyce was doing. The way that Joyce was using the ring, working that jab, and the jab was the key weapon. He won the battle of the jabs. He was using the ring, those natural advantages, he used them well. So I'll get to some other comments here. If you've got some questions, throw them in now. So Peter says Dubois was exposed. I don't necessarily think that he was exposed, because if we say that, then that sort of undermines the performance and the effort by Joyce. I think you have to give Joe Joyce a lot of credit for this performance. This is why this was such a good fight. It was very hard to call how this was going to go. There were so many outcomes and avenues, and people were so split on how this was going to turn out. So Special Case is, does this mean we don't see Triple D is going to clean up the heavyweight division comments anymore? Well, he's 23. There is more than enough time for him to go away, rebound, and come back. I mean, I still think that he can be a heavyweight champion. Obviously, this could be the wake-up call that he needs his career, with his training. Maybe they were, believing into some of his hype to some extent. Maybe they underestimated Joe Joyce, his pedigree. That could be possible because it sort of seemed to be Dubois between rounds early on looked a little bit shocked, and the commentators kept noting, he's shaking. And Joseph says Dubois just couldn't stop the jab. Yeah, very good point. He just couldn't seem to, overcome that. And I wasn't hearing a lot of advice from the corner about how he should go about to be able to respond to that. But Daniel Dubois doesn't react and adapt in fights maybe as well as he could potentially. He's still a young fighter, a developing fighter. I know some people will, on the back of that, just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that he was a hype job, overhyped, and he's no good. But that would be taking credit away from Joyce in the performance. I still think Daniel Dubois is still one of the best heavyweight prospects in the world. Just because he lost here doesn't take away from that. Remembering Joe Joyce was also in that conversation as one of the best heavyweight prospects in the world. I certainly had him in my top 6 for the past couple of years now. That Joyce, along with Daniel Dubois, Tony Yoka, Philip Hergovea, Jugba, they've been my sort of, 6 guys for a couple of years now. Styles make fights, performances make fights, and on any given night, if you come in there with the right strategy and you can execute, you can beat someone who is more highly touted than you. So TK says Joyce is after a title, and he's been for that for the last few years. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to get into a title fight next, but we'll have to see. Frank Warren will have to deliver him something. Maybe he will be able to work with Top Rank and Bob Arum to get one of their heavyweights for a fight. They've done that before, remembering Bryant Jennings, that fight, which was at the start of 2019. Joe Joyce versus Oscar Rivas. Joe Joyce versus Carlos Takam. I think I'd rather see the Rivas fight. I think there's enough intrigue there. Who else could he face from there? Ajit Kabial versus Joe Joyce. That would be a very good fight in my view as well. So Daniel says, I think the reason he lost is Triple D is a one-trick pony, only looking for the overhand right, easy to anticipate. Well, yeah, there were a few times where that overhand right did look a little telegraphed, and Joyce knew it was coming. He was able to just keep circling out of the way of that right hand. But he knew that that was the one trick, the best trick of Daniel Dubois. But I think Daniel Dubois at times went away from his own jab, which sometimes when he was throwing it with authority, he was accurate. He was able to snap back Joyce's head and be effective with it. And the body punching, he sort of went away from it. Maybe it was nerves here as well. Because I think after the first round or so, I think Daniel Dubois, the nerves were sort of telling. The big occasion, he knew what was at stake here. Joyce seemed to be overall the more calm and confident, right through phased by too much, even when he was under pressure. So someone says, Herger like that fight. That would be good if that could get made. Muhammad, I'm Bruce Lee, says Triple D versus Whittaker next. Let's hope not. Joyce should fight Hunter, Chisora, Parker, the likes of those. Well, Joyce, since he turned professional back in 2017, when he was with Haymaker, they were trying to make that Chisora fight, and perhaps because of the experience, I'm sure that they've sparred before, maybe Derek Chisora knew that Joe Joyce is going to be a handful, remembering he was asking, I think, for £5 million to face him, which was basically saying, I don't want the fight. Emeka says Frank Warren gutted, bad business for him, hype train stopped. Yeah, I think Frank Warren's had a lot riding on Daniel Dubois and his future, what he's going to do. And I think, with the 5-year contract they've got in place, he's still going to be riding that into the ground. Obviously, this is a bit of a stumbling block, but it doesn't need to be the end. Daniel Dubois is 23. Clearly, he's still one of the best heavyweight prospects in the world. He can come again. Lawrence says, Boxing Squared, do you think based on that performance Joyce can roll with any of the big boys, even the likes of White, Parker, Povetkin? Where does he go now? Actually, yeah, those are the sorts of fights. I think if this version of Joe Joyce shows up, one who is utilizing, remembering he is a big guy, 6'6", he's got a good reach of 82 inches. He is bigger than the likes of White, Parker and Povetkin. And let's remember, Dillian White's not exactly a technician. He can be a bit sloppy in there. I think a guy like Joe Joyce would fancy his chances against Dillian White. Maybe it would be a little bit trickier in terms of a Joseph Parker with the boxing skills, but Parker wouldn't be able to get him out of there. And remembering, Parker does also, a little bit like Daniel Dubois, sometimes have gas tank issues. He fights in spurts, and then he tends to go into energy-conserving mode partway through fights of a 12-rounder. You imagine Joe Joyce keep boxing, popping the jab, racking up rounds. There's nothing to say he can't win fights against guys who are in the top 10. But whether he gets those fights is another story, remembering he's out on Frank Warren Island right now, and there's not potentially a lot of options out there. They've got Tyson Fury, but Tyson Fury is also wedded to ESPN and Top Rank. That fight's unlikely. Maybe they can get Joyce on some Top Rank cards, I don't know, against some other Top Rank heavyweights. Unclear. But I would hope that they'll be able to get something meaningful for Joyce, because this is the sort of fight for Joe Joyce that he's been wanting. This is the sort of fight where he's able to command some respect and go, look, see, this is what I've been talking about. I can mix it with the better heavyweights of the division. I'm not just some guy who's going to get beaten at the first hurdle. I think a lot of people thought that he was going to, at some point, just get blasted out. Obviously some of the defensive issues he's clearly had in his career have suggested that that may happen, may in fact be too leaky, but he was able to shore that up, be more defensively responsible, and really implement a game plan that just flummoxed Daniel Dubois. He outboxed Dubois and out-jabbed Daniel Dubois, that won the battle of the jabs. So special case is Frank was fishing for a rematch straight after the fight. Well, I think that if it's not in the contract, I don't think that Joe Joyce is going to take that. I mean, who would win in the rematch? Well, that's a good question. I still think it would be another tense, entertaining fight. Okay, just getting back down to the bottom of the chat. So apologies, like I say, the chat is moving very quickly. If I do miss your comments, just drop it again. So over 800 in the building, so smash that like button if you can, please, and thank you. Do appreciate you joining another Boxing Squared live stream, wherever you may be in the world. So Michael says, yo, Boxing Squared, Mick from the UK here. I think it's fair to say Dubois needs to rebuild against the likes of your Dave Allen, David Price, or even Alan Babbage. Next for Joyce must be Usyk. Well, wouldn't that be a great sort of, there'd be a lot of storylines for that sort of fight. Usyk versus Joyce. Remembering they did meet in the World Series of Boxing, what was it, 2012, 2013. Bearing in mind, Joyce had only really just sort of joined that scene in terms of the World Series of Boxing. That might have been one of his first fights from memory. I did actually do a video on Joe Joyce about 18 months ago, series called The Rise Off, so I do cover his early amateur career. So if you do want to check out what happened, but I mean, he's come on leaps and bounds since then, obviously more seasons, but some of the same issues would still be there. Alexander Usyk is a very tricky operator. He's able to throw shots and keep moving, utilize angles. That would be a much different fight from this one. Wolf says, Dillian White got a gifted career by Eddie Hearn. Joyce and Dillian White, that would be an entertaining fight. Just because of promotional issues, can't see it. Alex says, I just pointed out to Mike Coppinger on Twitter that calling Joyce's jab lazy after round 2 might have been a bias, but he still wasn't having any of it. No one wants to give Joyce any credit. Well, if people don't want to give him any credit, well, that's over to them. I actually thought the jab, we know that Joe Joyce doesn't have a lot of, speed on his punches. I mean, I saw someone saying yesterday that Joyce had thrown the knockout punch and it was just a matter of when it landed in the fight. Wayne says, Boxing Squared, I thought Triple D would steamroll through Joe Joyce, but man, Joyce is mega tough, big heart, proved me wrong, well-deserved win for Joyce. And the fact he is tough, and he does have some skills, relatively technically sound, although, throw those punches with a lot of speed, he's proven to be incredibly effective. Glenn says, good power, but not top level. So is that Joyce? People questioning, does Daniel Dubois have that elite level power after tonight's performance? But, remembering, we knew heading into this fight, Joe Joyce had a chin. And if Dubois won, he was probably going to be, landing a lot of shots and cracking that chin. So Jack says, Triple D lost to another top fighter in his prime. That doesn't make him a hype job. Someone had to win, someone had to lose. Yeah. I echo that sentiment. Very good call there. Joyce versus Zhang next, so Joyce can expose him. Well, I think Joe Joyce, just because of promotional issues, I can't see that happening. Zhili Zhang is part of the Matchroom stable. I can't see them giving it to him. TopHeavyweights.com says Joyce versus Hunter makes sense. I think in terms of just being a very good fight, yeah, I would like to see that. And Hunter is obviously a free agent at the moment. But there would be maybe some questions and maybe some reservations from a guy like Frank Warren, who potentially after this sort of win, these sorts of titles that he's picked up, or anything else that was to be on the line, that if Joyce, maybe shades of Bacoli versus Hunter, if that happens with Joyce, it's a much tougher, a different style matchup than this fight. Michael Hunter with speed and quickness, popping in and out. Still an interesting fight. I'd like to see it, but that could definitely be a good fight to be made. Mickey says, I think Joe Joyce's style would give Fury a good test. He doesn't gas out, and a great chin. Tony says, I hate Warren. Joyce needs to get over to Matchroom. I'm not sure how long that he is tied to Frank Warren. I mean, remembering Joe Joyce, along with his manager Sam Jones, have bounced around, obviously with David Haye in the beginning, then they were over. Maybe they have kept their options open a little bit. I mean, it was clear that he wasn't at the top of the pecking order at Queensbury. I don't know how long his deal is, because if he does have some freedom to go somewhere, that could potentially open up some avenues. Simon says, was watching another YouTuber and they kept saying, Brits quit, I can't educate idiots, so I'm glad I found a sensible channel. Thank you for watching, I appreciate it. So 750 in the building, smash that like button on the way in or the way out, that would be much appreciated. So I'll wrap up in another few minutes. My voice is starting to get a little bit hoarse, but yeah, certainly a entertaining fight. It lived up to expectations. I really enjoyed it. I didn't really care who won. I just wanted to see a good fight, and we won that. And ahead of the fight, I said it was very hard to pick, and I was finding it hard to fall one way or the other, because I was running scenarios back in my mind about how this would play out. Did I think that Joe Joyce was going to win the battle of the jabs? No, I did not. But yeah, obviously some of the things with Daniel Dubois we'll have questions about now is the stamina. Can he, muscled? Does he need to maybe trim some of that muscle down? Because Joe Joyce kept coming. He was able to outwork him. Remembering, Joe Joyce was almost 260 pounds. But his cardio, his stamina in there, it did prove out in the fight. And it won him some rounds where Daniel Dubois was having some early success, but then wasn't able to sustain it. So Natalie says, Frank Warren has no class, said Dubois was incapacitated. He was incapacitated. Okay, so she continues, he didn't get caught with an elbow to the eye. It was Joe's fist. Oh, is Frank Warren claiming it was an elbow? If there is any video evidence to back that up, I'm sure that'll be up on social media pretty soon. David says that he won £100 as called stoppage by Joyce in the 10th round. Well done, you. Jimbo says, shocked at all the casuals. Montgomery says, Brits have got the heavyweights sewn up at the moment. Where's the Americans? Well, you've got some Americans coming through. Obviously, someone who had been holding it down for a while was Deontay Wilder. Michael Hunter has been rising more recently. You have good heavyweights like Jared Anderson coming through at the moment. But it is a little thinner on the ground than it used to be in decades gone by. IB Freely says, one had all rounds for Dubois. Well, after 8 rounds, I had it even, and then I think I had it 5-4 for Joyce after round 9. Obviously, there wasn't actually too much action in round 10, but yeah, there was a lot of seesaw action, and some of the rounds where Dubois would start strong, but then he would have different flurries throughout. He was able to, on my card, win some of those rounds. But overall, Joyce kept a good tempo. He did push Daniel Dubois into deeper waters, and I guess some people will say he drowned him here. Some people will say Daniel Dubois quit there, but clearly that eye looked pretty messed up. It was mincemeat. So, yeah, Joe Joyce did a number on that eye, and that jab, that was the key to the victory here. MD says, let's see if Dubois can improve his heart department like Klitschko did after the defeat. Wilder got beaten too, but at least he never gave up. Adam says, Jean-Claude Van Damme is a viable contender. Kevin says, Usyk will school Joyce like he did already. I wouldn't mind seeing that fight in the pros here, because obviously it's the same sort of scenario. Can the big, burly guy in Joyce, with the way that he fights, even if he fought like this tonight, Usyk's a different kettle of fish, a much slicker boxer than Daniel Dubois. And the thing is, you know that Alexander Usyk would not be able to stop, or possibly wouldn't be able to stop a guy like Joe Joyce. I can't pronounce that name, apologies for that. Surely Dubois is going to be dropped from the WBO rankings, isn't it? Potentially he might be dropped down, but maybe he wasn't dropped out of the WBO rankings. He was also at number 2 when he fought Tyson Fury. I think he got dropped down to like 10th or 12th or something like that at the time. Dubois says, this could be the best thing for Dubs in the long run. Remember Joe Louis. And this could be actually the best thing that does happen for him, because they can analyze his performance, what went right, what went wrong, what were some of the things that he went away from in there. Is he able to implement some different things in his training camp, train differently, maybe come in at a lower weight? I don't know. I thought 245 was starting to get towards the heavier end for him. He was starting to look a little bit muscle-bound in the last year or so, and perhaps we could say that did affect his gas tank. These will be some of the questions that we will have. So Truth Son with the super chat there, thank you very much for that, kind sir, says Triple D got battered by Slow-Mo Joe's relentless ramrod jab and experience exposed inexperience. And that will be one of the cases people will make here. Frank Warren will say it was the right fight at the right time, and certainly Daniel Dubois certainly thought it was the right fight at the right time. But obviously Joe Joyce, with a good game plan and being able to execute that, and he was the one that was able to adapt. Dubois wasn't quite really prepared for, or couldn't overcome during the fight to him. So Stoned Alligator says, I noticed your channel receiving a lot more traffic of late. Congrats, man, you deserve it. I don't really think it's too much more than usual, but the pandemic, I have to say, that really did hit the channel hard, because obviously no fights for a long time, and it's still been relatively sporadic. I would say some of the traffic that I've been getting lately is still below pre-pandemic levels, but some of that is because I think, this is the first month of November where we've started to get back to more of a status quo, but it still seems to be we only get big fights maybe 2 or 3 weekends of the month in the heavyweight division. But appreciate you noticing that it has been sort of ticking up. It's starting to get back to where it was, but hopefully more fights, more action, more coverage. And I know that, some people don't like to watch everything, and I do like to cover some of the lower level fights, including there was obviously on this card, David Adelaide versus Danny Whitaker. Some of these other prospects, they're good to cover. I like to sort of get in early and follow their careers. Tim says, ever seen a fight won solely on a jab? There was no rights, no hooks, just jabs. Yeah, I mean, that was the primary weapon of Joe Joyce in this fight. I would love to see the stats about jabs thrown and jabs landed, because you're right, there was the odd shot where he was throwing in like the 1-2, or there might be an overhand right, but he certainly, the jab at range, there was just no in for Daniel Dubois. He made him pay when he was trying to come in, just kept popping in with his jab. And this is one of these things some of these other heavyweights can take notice of. And I think Tony Yoka, that fight yesterday, was an example of it. Yoka just let Christian Hammer come straight in, didn't punish him with the jab, make him pay for, wanting to come in and close the distance. And we saw again, an effective jab can win you a fight, a high-level fight. Gordon says, Frank just did an IFL interview and said one judge had Dubois up 7 rounds. What? I mean, it was a close fight for 7 rounds in a 10-round fight, where only 9 were scored. Yes, I mean, that if that is one of the cards, I think there's some cause for concern there. Will says, I called it for Joyce, KO's round 8 to 10. I'll never get a prediction so accurately correct. What a nice bit of nice money here. Been saying how surprised I was that Joe was the underdog for a while. Well, I think, Joyce was the underdog for a few beyond the hype that Daniel Dubois had obviously had. I think the version of Joe Joyce, which has shown up in recent fights, I think people were rightly concerned about if that version of Joe Joyce turns up, where he's just plodding forward and eating shots and taking them, like Tic Tacs, that he was going to get pieced up. But and this is why in my pre-fight, and this is a view that I had for since the fight was announced, I thought Joe Joyce would actually utilize some movement, use the ring, use his height and his reach, and try to make it difficult for Daniel Dubois, show him something that he wasn't necessarily expecting, and largely that's what we got. And Joe Joyce, that version of Joe Joyce tonight, can be extremely effective. Lawrence says, how do you stay so well informed? Your knowledge is second to none. Well, I think one of the key things is, and I know a lot of people, social media, but Instagram, most boxers, heavyweight boxers, at any certain level in the heavyweight division, about 80% of them are relatively active on Instagram. So you get to keep tabs with what everyone's doing. Plus, obviously, different videos that come out on YouTube that other, interview channels are doing, or, there's the websites as well. It just sort of soak it all up too. But obviously as well, I do reach out to some of these fighters and get little bits of insight as well. Not some of the real top level fighters, because, you never hear back from them. In terms of Loud Boxer, he's saying, just like I said, Joyce between rounds 8 and 11, Daniel Dubois just wasn't seasoned enough to deal with Joe's experience down the stretch, and his heart had gone along with his gas tank. Well, that will be an argument, the last part, that some people will be making. Did he quit in there? That's what some people will be asking. That eye was pretty messed up, so I can't blame him for not, being able to continue. He was counted out. He did get up, and he did, kind of like when Charles Martin was dropped by Joshua, and clearly he'd missed the count, and then he sort of sprung up after the count of 10. That's exactly what Daniel Dubois did. So, some people will say, look, he did quit, he tried to make it, and people will say he mistimed it, but I think, the writing was on the wall. That eye was messed up bad and continue, and Joyce was probably just going to go on and mow him down, or that eye down a bit further. And maybe that was the right time to pull out, at least in terms of what I guess is an injury now for that eye. If he'd had taken too much punishment, more punishment in this fight, perhaps that we would have been talking about different issues in relation to that eye and potential long-lasting injury. Joyce is a big dude. Those jabs are power shots, says Mr. Wawa. And at times, yeah, obviously it swelled that eye up something chronic, but that last one, you could see the difference that, so he was putting some mustard on that. He may not be the biggest puncher, the hardest puncher, but those punches, even those jabs, come in with authority. They really are clubbing shots. Harry says, what did you make of Adelaide? Well, I did a video on the channel, so if you check that out, that's my thoughts on that one. Boxing Talk TV says he just didn't win with his jab. He won with his chin, his stamina, his overall presence. Nobody here can say Joyce doesn't beat Usyk, but then again, many said he wouldn't get past Triple D. Yeah, no, it wasn't just with his jab, but the jab, it started with the jab, but it was a collection of everything else too. But the game plan, the strategy that they employed was obviously something that Daniel Dubois just couldn't respond to, couldn't adapt to, couldn't overcome. Great game plan from his team, and he executed it to a T. Kevin says Frank ruined Triple D, having him beat up too many tomato cans. Well, I guess that's one of the questions people will have. Was he sort of robbed of relevant fights, tougher fights, where he could actually get some meaningful rounds in? Because all the early knockouts, sure, they look good for the show reel, but is it something to be said that he was underdone here? He didn't actually have some of those hard fights that he would have benefited from. Remembering, and I mentioned this earlier, he faced the likes of Ebenezer Tete. You had Ricardo Schneiders, Kyotaru Fujimoto. That was his lineup ahead of this fight. Not exactly the greatest fights to prepare you for this, and then throw in there the inactivity caused by the pandemic. So Wallace says, hello from Melbourne, great fight, and I won my $5 bet on Joe Joyce to win in the late rounds. Triple D very young and has plenty of time to come back. Love you Kiwis. So I hope you're doing well over there in Australia, and I think that's a good point. Daniel Dubois is young, he can come back. Muhammad says, Joyce broke Triple D's heart like he did Hrgovic. Okay, just getting back to the top of the chat here. So Oliver says, been a long time Joyce fan. I knew he would win even though everyone was against him. Well, I'm not sure everyone was against him. I had certainly noticed in the past couple of weeks a groundswell of support, especially in comment sections on my videos, that a lot of people were picking Joyce to win. Maybe even more so than Daniel Dubois. I'd seen a swing. That wasn't really reflected in the betting odds, but I'd seen a lot of people saying, yeah, I think Joe Joyce does this. Alom says Frank Warren is selfish, jealous of Matchroom and AJ, and wanting something similar. James says, how could Dubois have won? More head movement, less muscle to be more agile, better stamina. What do you think? Yeah, I mean, I think he would have benefited from that. I mean, part of the reason he got pieced up with that jab is there wasn't a lot of head movement. That was an issue. They're going to have to look at that. Stoned Alligator says, I feel like you can see in Dubois' eyes that he doesn't have that lion heart in him that top fighters have. Well, I don't think we can completely cast judgment on the efforts of one fight. He's young, obviously somewhat inexperienced. He can come again. Well, I mean, we're going to have to, some of these sorts of assessments will take years to really establish. So Joe says, Frank is to blame. Can't go Joyce, need to build up experience gradually. Big Boys Boxing says he quit. At 23, it was probably the best thing to do. If that eye is permanently damaged, he may never box again. If it's not, he may have been, if he continued, hands higher to block jabs. And Montgomery says something with a lot of people have been echoing, a good jab will take you far in boxing. Yes, sirree. Right Hook Boxing says, big up Boxing Squared and big up Right Hook Boxing to you. So if you haven't followed or don't know of his channel, he does have a great channel, and no doubt he's got some post-fight coverage up as well. So he says, great fight. Think Daniel Dubois will learn from this fight. This loss has created the chance to make him. Credit to Joe Joyce, did an impressive job. Yeah, great fight. I enjoyed it. Joyce did what he had to do to get the win. Great game plan. So we're an hour and 2 minutes into the stream. My voice is starting to feel a little bit hoarse here, so I'll go for a couple more minutes and we'll wrap up. I know I said that like about 15 minutes ago, but yeah, I must actually have a quick drink. Just a second. So Robert says, I really wanted Joe Joyce to win because he is from the same part of London as me. I was really worried that he would lose to Dubois. My brother put £10 on Joyce. Scott says, congratulations Right Hook Boxing on picking exact round for KO for Joyce. Did you cash out on that, Right Hook Boxing? Sounds like that would have been a good amount of coin back. Kian says he did the same thing with Anthony Yard. Frank doesn't care about his fighters. He makes them feel like they are good by feeding them the bums, then throw them in the deep end. James says Frank Warren would toss his dead mother into a ring if the timing was right. Alum says Triple D was very clever taking the knee, and David Hay of all people should not criticize him. Shows he's still thinking under pressure. Big Boys Boxing says, Fish Eyes cash cow is now just another cow. Joyce ain't no big draw, but should get a big shot after this win. Well done, Juggernaut. RIP Frank Warren. A few people letting their thoughts known about Frank Warren here. Right Hook Boxing says, hoping both get credit. Great fight and both were prepared to risk it. We need more of this. Thank you, Squared. Yes, we do need more of these fights. This was the sort of fight we don't get nearly often enough. And the fact so many people have come to this post-fight review, for example, to hear about people talking in the comments and discussing this fight. These are the fights that we need more often. These are the fights that help boxing, heavyweight boxing, draw in more fans because, I think we've just spoken about too many times we get, a good fighter against guys that they'll blast out in a couple of rounds. Doesn't do anyone good. These are the sort of fights that, careers can rise and fall on, and there's a lot on the line. And, obviously because there is a lot on the line, sometimes people don't want to pull the trigger on these fights. But full credit to both for having taken this, for actually, doing what needed to be done, I've weights for having taken this fight. And yeah, seesaw action, Joyce comes out on top. But I will wrap it up there. Thank you very much for watching, for coming along to another Boxing Squared live stream. Smash that like button, please, if you could, on the way in or the way out, as it is at this point. I do appreciate all the support, the continued support for the channel. It does, obviously help and make me continue, people wanting to watch the content. So yeah, a big shout out to everyone who is